The basement smelled of developing chemicals and old carpet, a sour metallic bite that never quite left her nostrils even after she climbed the stairs and stood under the kitchen faucet for 10 minutes letting cold water run over her wrists. A single red bulb swung overhead on a frayed cord, turning everything the color of dried blood. Shadows stretched long and liquid across the walls, pooling in the corners where old film canisters and cracked trays waited like forgotten teeth. She sat perfectly still on the wooden stool he had sanded smooth himself. 3 years ago, he'd told her proudly, for models who understand stillness. Her knees were pressed together so tightly the bones ached. Hands folded in her lap the way he'd shown her, fingers laced, thumbs crossed, palms upturned just enough to catch a thin crescent of light. The thin cotton dress, white, chosen because white reads innocence without shouting it, was already damp at the small of her back. Under the safe light it looked almost translucent. She could see the faint blue tracery of veins along her forearms whenever she dared glance down. He circled her slowly, Hasselblad hanging from its worn leather strap like a pendant made of black iron. Each step was deliberate, the soles of his boots making the faintest gritty scrape against the concrete. Click. Advance. Click. The shutter sounded like a slow, dry heartbeat, hers, maybe, or his, or something mechanical that lived between them. Every sound made her shoulders flinch the tiniest bit inward, though she had trained the movement smaller each session until it was nearly invisible. Nearly. "You're doing beautifully," he said, voice pitched low, the same register he used when he spoke to her mother on the phone. "The way the light catches your throat. God, it's perfect. You were made for this, you know that?" She stared at the crack in the concrete floor. A long-ago chemical spill had stained it into the shape of a dark comma, the tail curling like a question no one ever answered. She counted the seconds between clicks. 7. Then 11. Then 4. The rhythm never settled. That was the worst part, not knowing when the next shutter would fall, not knowing which breath would be the one he chose to trap forever. He lowered the camera. Came closer. Close enough that the heat of him brushed her bare arms like a second skin. She could smell the coffee on his breath, black, no sugar, the way he drank it to stay sharp, and beneath that the sharp metallic bite of the darkroom timer he always carried in his shirt pocket, ticking faintly against his chest. His shadow fell across her lap, blotting out the red light so that for a second she was in true dark. "Look at me," he said. She didn't want to. Looking made it real. Looking meant seeing the tenderness in his face, the way his pupils opened wide in the dimness like he was drinking her in through his eyes. But she did look, because refusing meant the session would stretch longer, and longer meant more chances for the dress to slip off one shoulder accidentally, more chances for him to murmur, just a small adjustment, while his fingers ghosted along her collarbone. His eyes were calm. Almost tender. The same eyes that had sat across the kitchen table from her mother 3 months ago, soft-spoken, reasonable. "I only work with natural light and classic poses," he'd said then. Tasteful. Artistic. The kind of work that ends up in galleries, not on cheap websites. $14,000 for the private collection, he'd explained. A legacy. Something her daughter could look back on when she was older and understand how special she had been at 13. Her mother had cried. Happy tears, grateful tears, and signed the release form with a hand that shook only slightly. Now those same eyes held hers. He reached out. Fingertips hovered an inch from her cheek, not touching, not yet. The air between them felt charged, the way it does before lightning. "Don't move," he whispered. "Just, let me see how the shadow falls across your mouth." Perfect. Exactly like that. Her pulse hammered so hard she was sure the Hasselblad could hear it, sure the lens was catching every frantic flutter beneath the thin skin of her throat. She tried to slow it, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, but the numbers blurred. Everything blurred. The red bulb swung gently on its cord and the shadows slid across his face like oil. He didn't touch her. Instead he lifted the camera again, slower this time, almost reverent. And pressed the shutter right against the hollow of her throat, so close she felt the cool metal kiss her skin. Click. The sound went straight through her bones, sharp and intimate, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. Something inside her chest tore quietly, like wet paper giving way. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a small, clean rip that would never mend the same. She tasted copper at the back of her tongue and realized she had bitten the inside of her cheek without noticing. He stepped back half a pace. Studied the ground glass finder. A small, satisfied smile curved his mouth, the smile that always came right before he said they were finished for the day, the smile that meant he had captured something he could develop later, alone, under brighter light, where he could linger over every grain and curve without her watching. Perfect, he breathed. That's the one. That's the one they'll remember. She kept staring at the comma on the floor. She didn't cry. 3 weeks ago, session 4, he had explained very gently that crying ruined the light on her face, made her eyes puffy, made the skin blotchy. We can't have that, he'd said, almost kindly. Beauty like yours deserves clarity. After that she had practiced in the bathroom mirror at home. Staring until her eyes burned, until tears welled, then forcing them back down with slow blinks and swallowed breaths. She was good at it now. Too good. He turned toward the long stainless steel sink. The trays were already lined up, developer, stop bath, fixer. The soft slosh of liquid moving back and forth sounded like breathing. He was already thinking about tomorrow, tomorrow's dress, maybe the pale blue one with the thin straps. Tomorrow's pose, perhaps reclining on the velvet drape he kept folded in the cabinet, tomorrow's particular angle of surrender. Behind him, so quietly that no one would ever hear it over the chemicals, the girl finally let one breath escape. A sigh. A surrender. The last small sound a trapped thing makes before it decides something final. She was still sitting exactly as he'd posed her, back straight, hands folded, chin tilted just so. But something in her eyes had gone darkroom black. And it was watching him. He hummed under his breath as he poured fresh developer, a tuneless little melody he always used when he felt pleased with the day's work. The sound grated against her spine like sandpaper. She let it grate. Let it sharpen the edges of the thing that was growing inside the torn place. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time in the basement had its own rules. He finally straightened, wiping his hands on the rag he kept looped through his belt. "We're done for today," he said, the same words every time, delivered with the same warm satisfaction. "You were exquisite. Truly." He crossed to her then, slow steps, boots scraping. He reached out, not to touch her face this time, but to brush a single strand of hair that had fallen across her forehead. His fingers lingered a fraction too long, the pad of his thumb grazing her temple. She didn't flinch. Not outwardly. Inside, though, the black thing flexed, stretched, tested the new space the tear had made. He smiled again, smaller, more private. "Same time tomorrow?" She nodded once. The smallest possible movement. "Good girl." He turned away to pack the Hasselblad into its foam-lined case. The latches snapped shut with clean, final clicks. She waited until his back was fully turned. Until she heard his foot on the bottom step. Then, very slowly, she unclasped her hands. Her fingers were stiff, bloodless. She opened them anyway. Looked down at her palms. The crescent of light had moved, now it lay across her lifeline like a pale scar. She closed her hands again. Tighter this time. When he reached the top of the stairs he called down without looking back. "Don't forget to drink some water before you leave. You get pale when you're dehydrated." The door closed. The lock turned. Silence rushed in, thick and red. She stayed on the stool another full minute, counting heartbeats this time instead of shutter clicks, until she was certain he wouldn't come back for one last test shot. Only then did she stand. Her legs shook. She let them. No one was watching now. She crossed to the sink. The developer tray still rocked gently, liquid surface gleaming like dark syrup. She stared into it. Saw her own face reflected back, ghostly, inverted, red-lit. The eyes in the reflection were not the eyes she remembered having at 12, or even at 13 last month. They belonged to someone older. Someone who had already counted the exits and found them all locked. She dipped 2 fingers into the tray. The liquid was cool, faintly slimy. She lifted them out. Watched the developer slide down her skin in slow, deliberate trails. Then she wiped her hand on the white dress, deliberately, smear by smear. Until a dark stain bloomed across the fabric right over her heart. It looked like blood. It wasn't. But it would do. She walked to the stairs. Paused with one foot on the bottom tread. Behind her the red bulb kept swinging, lazy arcs of light and shadow washing over the stool where she had sat for 3 hours without complaint. She didn't look back. Instead she climbed, slowly, carefully, each step a decision she hadn't made yesterday. At the top she tried the knob. Locked, of course. But she had watched him every time he turned the key these past weeks. She had memorized the angle of his wrist, the small extra twist he always gave at the end because the tumblers stuck. She reached into the tiny pocket he had laughed about, so charmingly useless on that dress, and took out the spare key she had slipped off his ring 2 sessions ago while he was changing lenses. The lock gave with a soft snick. She stepped through into the hallway. Afternoon light, real light, slanted through the kitchen window and struck her full in the face. It hurt. She welcomed the hurt. She didn't run. Running would have meant panic. Instead she walked, still barefoot, still in the stained white dress, through the living room, past the framed prints on the wall, none of her, those were kept private, past the leather couch where her mother sometimes waited with coffee and magazines. The front door was unlocked. She opened it. Stepped out. The sun was low, the air smelled of cut grass and distant barbecue. Normal sounds, a lawnmower 2 streets over, children shouting, a car stereo thumping bass. She stood on the porch for a long moment, blinking against the brightness. Then she started walking. Not home, not yet. Just away. 1 foot in front of the other. The stained dress fluttered against her thighs. Somewhere behind her a door opened, then closed again quickly. She didn't turn around. The black thing in her chest no longer felt torn. It felt like wings. Small ones. Still wet. But growing.